So, what is a showrunner? Is it a new type of sneaker? Well, sometimes. This week, we talk to one and find out what makes a showrunner run on another athletic episode of Brio TV, the podcast. Welcome back to the podcast. Showrunner is a term that wasn't really used much before Stephen Bochco came along and started crafting shows such as Hill Street Blues in the 80s and NYPD Blue. The art of moving a series forward, casting it right, helping a show find its tone and voice, that's something they don't really teach in film or TV school. You kind of have to learn it on the job. Two who found the right formula and are always in demand in Canada are the husband and wife team of Mark Ellis and Stephanie Morgenstern. They've been award-winning creators, writers, executive producers, and showrunners on such popular shows as Flashpoint, Company, Transplant, and now the new CBC series Allegiance. If you listened to this podcast a few weeks ago, I spoke with one of the stars of Allegiance, Enrico Colantoni. Here now is one of his showrunner bosses, same guy he worked with on Flashpoint, Mark Ellis. It's good to see you. How are you, Mark?
I'm pretty good.
Now, let's talk about Allegiance. I watched the pilot. Very exciting. It builds to one of those great TV conclusions, Mark. Congrats again. And it was a beautiful looking, handsome production in Surrey, BC, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
And what does a location like that give you when you're planning a police procedural show? I mean, there's so many beautiful. I was just talking to Winston about the scenery, the overhead shots. Establishing that setting has got to be an important part of this series, right?
Oh, it's front and center, and this show is created by Anar Ali, and she chose to set it there for a number of reasons. Steph and I were not. Stephanie Morgenstern, of course, is my co-showrunner and longtime partner. I'd been to Vancouver a couple of times, but I didn't know the greater Vancouver area too well. So we flew out there in April and before we started the writing room to try and get a sense of Surrey. And it's a cool place. I mean, it's elevated, I think, by some of that work that you see in the interstitials when we're moving in between scenes, or we're in the POV of Enrico Colantoni's character or Supinder Raj's character. But so we see this great cityscape. But I was struck when I was out there. I'll tell you what it made me think of, Bill, because I lived in England for a few years when I was a kid. And when I came back, I guess I was about 9 years old. I really didn't have a sense of Canadian identity until I really started to watch Beachcombers. And I grew up in Etobicoke, and I know you know Etobicoke, so Etobicoke is not the Beachcombers. No. But I said, okay, this is Canada. Here we are on a boat with Nick and Relic, and we're racing down the Sunshine Coast, and we're seeing those beautiful rafts of logs float along, and we're seeing mountains and oceans. And I thought, well, this is a lovely place. And we went to Surrey, and as I flew in, I saw those same logs floating along the river.
Wow.
And it's not quite as pretty, but it did make me think about Canada now versus Canada at that time when Beachcombers was shot. And I think there's something wonderful about Surrey in that it's a real representation, I think, of what a growing city looks like in North America, in Canada specifically. You can drive down the street and be on Millionaires Row at Panorama Ridge, and then you can turn a corner a few minutes later and be in Newton or Whalley, which are, areas that are sometimes have pockets that are struggling. And that's an auto dealership and then be beside a cranberry field or a blueberry patch, right?
Yeah.
It's a wonderful place.
Even in Vancouver is like that, just street to street. There's some radical changes sometimes, east and west for sure. But yeah, no, I don't remember seeing any logs on the Humber River flowing down.
Maybe a few dead suckers beside the riverbank there, eh?
More like empty milk cartons, I think, pop
Yeah.
cans or something like that. Yeah. Now let's tell folks. So it's basically, this is a story of a rookie recruit on the Surrey, BC police station. She's head of her class. She's graduated with total honors. She's a real prospect. And this is the character is played by Supinder Rach. And when she's arrives at the station, she's going to be mentored by our friend Rico Colantoni, who is playing a veteran police officer who is very skilled at partnering and bringing along the hot prospects. So it's a nice combination. Well, first of all, where did you find Rach? I know she was in Sort of and the 410. What put her in mind for this role?
Well, when Anar created the show, I think she always had Supinder in mind to play that part. The two of them had worked together. I think that they made a short film together. And Supinder is a wonderful actor. She's in demand. She's busy. So when we started looking for someone to play the role of Sabrina, we understood that she wasn't going to be available. So we cast a very wide net and saw a plethora of wonderful, wonderful Canadian actors. And then at the last minute, she was available. And so she came in at the very last stage of casting. I think we were down to about 3 or 4 actors. And she came in to do chemistry reads with Rico Colantoni. And, casting is a funny thing, you can have wonderful actors, but they don't quite fit that magical thing sometimes that you're looking for. And then when you find it and when you see it, you don't need to take notes. You don't need to write a list of pros or cons. I find that I just kind of lay down my pen and say, that's it. And it was her. And you could see it in the chemistry with Rico. I think they both felt a connection to each other straight away, which wound up translating really well as we shot the series. The two of them are thick as thieves.
Yeah, there's an empathy there when they connect that you can see. And I think Rico's character is playing more of a family man than in Flashpoint, say, or some other roles. But he's played this role of a father figure before, of course, in Veronica Mars. And was he immediately first to mind for you for this role?
Yes, and Stephanie and I came into the project at a relatively late stage. Allegiance was developed by Lark Productions, by Aaron Haskett, Nicole Mendez, out west with Anar Ali, who is based here in Toronto, and they worked with the CBC, I think, for probably about 2 years before the show got to the stage of development where they needed to attach a showrunner, and that's where we came along. What was the question? Sorry.
Well, just as you're talking, I want to ask, you and Stephanie have this great knack. You're really regarded very highly as showrunners and have been. I know on Flashpoint, the network, everybody would sing your praises. And on Transplant, I understand, I think you came in on the second season of that series to do a similar role. What is the magic special sauce that you guys have? Like, what is it that people need when you come into a show that you're able to deliver?
I think that there's an emotional quality in our writing that seems to be a good fit for certain types of police shows, not every police show. I think Stephanie and I are both actors, and so we try and write heart forward, sometimes to our own detriment. But we also bring a degree of pace, I think, and action to the projects that we're interested in. And this, so Allegiance, I think, felt like the right fit. I mean, there are things that only Anar can speak to in this show. There are things that our writer's room, who is intensely talented, can only speak to. And there are things that we can do, which is to help shape, to play to each other's strengths. I tend to work well with the broad strokes of a show, whether that's in breaking a season or an episode, or looking at the musical beats for an episode in post-production. Stephanie is a very tireless truth teller, rewriter, perfectionist. She keeps going long after I've admitted defeat at the end of the day. She has a great eye for post-production and editing and brings a lot of magic there. So, and in some ways, we're a 2-for-1 deal. Right, you get two leaders with different personalities and strengths that can lift each other up and keep a show and a team going when the going gets a little bit tough.
So you're like Bill Persky and Sam Denoff, basically. You've got that.
Yeah,
Stephanie's better looking than Sam Denoff, certainly. But networks, I know they just. Television's an expensive business. It's an impossible business. And they rely on folks like you that they can have confidence in to deliver these things. So where did you learn this, Mark? I know you went to, I think, Martin Grove Collegiate, Ryerson. Was there, what point did you think, hey, I'm going to make television shows?
Oh, well, I grew up getting in trouble for spending too much time watching TV. And, it would never cross my mind that would be where I would wind up going. I went to Martin Grove. I was in the gifted program, and I was surrounded by, it was great because I was a real misfit in middle school. And so, I was able to discover a tribe, but my tribe was not all the math geniuses that went on to write Harvard papers at all. So in some ways it was pretty distressing for me. But what I did do was I found the drama kids. And among those drama kids was Dennis McGrath, who was 2 years older than I was. And for some reason, he decided to, as a kid in grade 12, to strike up a friendship with a kid in grade 10. And I remember and Dennis, of course, had a great career as a TV writer. But I remember at the time, I had my stupid, grade 10 friends, and we'd strong arm Dennis because he was a big guy and to go into the beer store to pick up a 2-4 for us. And then we wouldn't invite him in to drink it with us.
It's not right.
He was great. He had a big heart. But what he did was he led the circus there with our productions at drama school, along with a beloved mentor of mine, Jim Hunt. And we did a lot of plays, and they weren't the usual kinds of musicals. They were sometimes challenging plays. And
Mark, I just, to stop you there, my memory, I've been in Martin Grove a couple times. It had a wonderful auditorium, didn't it? There was a great stage in that high school.
Yeah. We went back. I was back there probably 6 or 7 years ago because they had a big reunion. And it's a wonderful, it probably seats 500 people.
Yeah.
Great facility. Yeah. Nothing had changed since I was there years ago. So it was all kind of falling apart. But they let us do things there that they would never let kids do now. We ran our own productions, and I remember I loved Faulty Towers.
Who didn't?
Exactly. TV Geek and Me coming out. And I wrote to John Cleese to see if I could secure permission to do a stage adaptation of Faulty Towers. And bless him, he wrote back and said, yes, I wish I could find that letter. So we did a stage adaptation of, I think, 2 or 3 episodes of Faulty Towers. And then we built a 2-level set. They'd never let you do that stuff in high school these days.
You do the Germans? What episodes?
I think we did what was the one with the woman who can't find her hearing aid? We did the hotel inspector episode.
What a great show.
Yeah.
So you produced that on stage. That's amazing.
So we produced that on stage and a lot of other challenging productions like Pygmalion. And then Dennis, we became fast friends, and I was sad when he left high school. He went to Ryerson for radio and television. Yeah. And I thought, I'd love to be an actor, but I was just a smart enough kid to know that every high school produces its kids who grow on to be actors and wind up as waiters. So I thought, well, Dennis is there, and maybe radio and television is kind of a compromise between the arts and being a lawyer or something. So I fell into that, and then I fell into another tribe, and I did a couple of years of sketch comedy with Dennis, with Kevin White, who became the showrunner of Kim's Convenience. And
Right. Wow.
Two of us branched off and did two-man comedy for a while, with Tyler Stewart, who is now the drummer for the Bare Naked Ladies. So even though I was going for radio and television, I was pouring all of my love into actually writing these silly sketches, and became an actor. Was very low on the totem pole in terms of the Canadian acting world, but got by. Met Steph. She showed me that there were stories that could be written. I'd always liked writing, but felt like I didn't have much to say as a young person. And I found something to say, and we told a story together, and that's how I fell into writing. Always, I will say, on the coattails of Dennis McGrath, who passed away a few years ago.
Yeah. How long has it been now, Mark? 2 or 3 years?
It'll be 7 years.
Oh, my God. Wow.
7 years this coming March.
Hard to believe. And Dennis was in his 40s, I think, when he died, didn't he?
He was in his late 40s, yeah, and a great champion of this Canadian television industry, a very loud voice who has not been replaced since then.
Yes, I know that he, there's, he writers followed him anywhere because he really raised the conditions and fought hard for them in that sort of brotherhood of writers in Canada, which is a tough club.
It sure is.
Yeah. Don't go away. We'll be right back with Mark Ellis. Well, did you know that it was June Carter Cash who wrote one of Johnny Cash's biggest hits, Ring of Fire? That's just one of the things you'll learn watching June, streaming this month on Paramount Plus. June shines a spotlight on the history of country music and the Carter and Cash families. The 5-time Grammy Award-winning singer, actor, and author has opened for Elvis, appeared on screen with Robert Duvall and Jane Seymour, and as mentioned, was a damn fine songwriter. Featuring interviews with the woman herself, the film also includes sit-downs with her family, admirers, and friends, including Dolly Parton, Reese Witherspoon, and Willie Nelson. And remember, there's a mountain of premium entertainment for audiences of all ages on Paramount Plus. Well, time once again to check in with our friend Emily Gagne at Hollywood Suite. Emily, Happy New Year. What do you got for us now?
Well, Bill, we're blasting off into 2024 with genre fare. We're talking sci-fi, we're talking horror, we're talking the freakiest and the most fun movies you can think of. Everything from Beetlejuice to Blade, we've got on our channels this month.
Wow, Blade scares me. What's the freakiest sci-fi film you've got, though?
Sci-fi, I mean, we've got 2001: A Space Odyssey. I don't know if that's the freakiest, but it's a classic. We've got Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But I really think if you want something weird and wonderful, we have this film called 976 Evil, which is directed by Freddy Krueger himself, Robert Englund.
Well, that's the number, 976 Evil. You can find it on Hollywood Suite. Emily, thanks for the tip.
Thanks, Bill.
And here he is again, Mark Ellis. So it's amazing, this convergence of talent. You mentioned Kevin White and others just at the right time in the right place. It makes a difference. So hats off to you for being part of that and pushing through to all these shows. What was your first breakthrough in terms of television then?
Well, I mean, that was Flashpoint, and
So you started at the top, but that's a hell of a start. I mean, didn't you do a 10-minute show for the National Film Board first, or
well, Stephanie Morgenstern made. I remember we met in 1996, and we were a couple before we became writing partners. And she lived in this place in Cabbage Town. And she said, "Oh, do you want to see my film?" And I said, "Sure." So she turned off the lights, and she was in this tiny apartment, which I later infested by moving in. And she brought out a 16 millimeter projector, and she showed me this film that she'd made called Curtains. And it was, about a young actor who is falling out of love with the show that she's in, just as her own relationship is crumbling. It was quite beautiful. And I thought, my God, like, you're an actor that has prominence that I admire. And here you are telling your own story. And she said, "Well, you could do that too. Don't you have any stories?" And then the two of us found a story together, and we made a short film called Remembrance, which was a little World War II story about a man with a perfect memory. And it did pretty well. It toured the film festival circuits. And out of that success, we picked up some writing agents. And they called us in to have a meeting at their office because we were going to pitch a feature version of this short film at the Toronto Film Festival. We'd won a spot in this thing called Pitch This.
Wow.
And on the way there, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a hostage situation at Union Station back in 2003 or 2004. Wow. It unfolded. We listened to the news. The clock radio came on. The story was breaking. We went down to watch it on TV. And it's outside Union Station, and it looks like a movie. There's all these commuters crowded around. There's police cars everywhere. There's reporters breathlessly saying there's been a hostage taken. You see a man with his gun to a woman's head. God. And then all of a sudden there's a cutaway. And then they cut back and there's a little orange blanket on the ground. And you know what's happened. And within the space of about 20 minutes, a man has been shot by the police. Wow. On TV. So we go to this meeting with these agents as these little short filmmakers, and they say, "Do you have anything else?" And we say, "Well, no, sorry, we don't. We're just, trying to figure ourselves out here. But did you guys hear this thing on the radio this morning? Did you see it unfold on TV? This police officer shot this man. I don't know what the story was for the poor man that put himself in a situation that got killed, or the woman who was taken hostage. But, this police officer basically became the public executioner at 9:00 in the morning. And man, like, what's the rest of this guy's day like?" And they said, "Well, okay, we're focusing on the film festival, and we know you want to make movies, but this sounds like it might be an interesting area for a CTV TV movie of the week," because they were still making those back then.
Yeah.
Know your film people, but how would you feel about maybe making some quick and dirty TV money? And we said, "Oh, well, like, yeah, sure." And so we researched what it was to be that kind of cop. And we Googled somebody who is the former second in command in the Toronto Emergency Task Force. He met us rather guardedly in the lobby of his condo and said, like, "Who the hell are you guys?" And we said, "Well, we're kind of interested in what the emotional journey is like for somebody who's had to do this." And he said, "Oh, okay, well, I'll see if I can hook you up with some folks." So we went and talked to that sniper, and we went late at night to the Toronto Emergency Task Force headquarters and finally pried some candid conversations out of them and developed a TV movie about that. And it, languished for a while. It got passed around to different executives, one of whom was Karen Trebetskoy, who I know you interviewed recently for her show Sight Unseen.
Yes.
She's the one that came up with our catchphrase, "Keep the peace." I'll give her full credit.
Okay.
Eventually it got to the top of the pile, and it's like, well, we're not really going to make TV movies anymore. Let's make a pilot out of this thing. And so we had 10 days to turn it from a TV movie into a pilot. And we don't know what we're doing. But we'd seen a ton of TV. We were actors. We'd read tons of scripts. We were playing day players in things like Kojak, so perceived it was in our bones. And we were watching CSI Miami in 24 because it was still network television
Right.
in those days. And so we said, hey, this show's going to have the pace of 24 and the look of CSI Miami. And we had a producer that bought into that and put the money on the screen. And we had the good fortune to be mentored by Tassie Cameron, who is the showrunner for Law and Order now and has done so many things, Rookie Blue, Pretty Hard Cases. And so she really helped us learn how to write. And we tried not to approach the process with any sense of arrogance. We didn't know what we were doing. We tried to learn from the producers who supported us, from Tassie, from the writers who were veterans that were surrounding us, and then just try and figure it out, really.
Well, you seem to figure it out. 6 seasons, 75 episodes later on CBS and CTV. Flashpoint was an enormous success story. And Mark, as you're talking, it just seems, that first meeting where they listened to your short idea and said, do you have anything else? And you said, no, but. I mean, that's basic sketch training, isn't it? You never just say nothing, you say, and also. But not everybody would do that at that point. When everything hinged on you talking about what you just saw, which led to all of this, didn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I have you're actually giving me too much credit because I can't pivot that easily. And I have enormous respect for so many of the writers that we've worked with in that they have multiple shows. And they can always bring something out of their mental drawer if they face that question in a pitch. Yeah. Stephanie and I, we say that we're serial monogamists when it comes to writing television. We can only think of one thing and hope it gets made. And we've been lucky that a lot of the things that we've pitched have been made.
It sure has worked out. Now, with Allegiance, part of it, the story deals with culture and racism, politics. It's it's a more complex stew. This show. This is a bit of a jump, but I'm wondering if you ever encountered or met Norman Jewison, if you might have a Jewison story, because he was somebody who often dealt with those themes, and had such a passion and impact on a lot of showrunners. Did you ever meet him?
I wish. I got invited to Canadian Film Centre barbecues over the years, and the times that I went, he was always surrounded by people, and I would see him from a distance and wish that I could talk to him. And I kicked myself that I never gave myself enough credit that maybe that I could. I admire him enormously, and what he's done for our industry is beyond measure. I think that the Canadian Film Centre and the primetime TV program have almost single-handedly given us an industry here. We have other training programs, which are great, but the system that they use there, whereby they curate a group of 8 or 10 writers to come in with a seasoned showrunner who has a concept, and where they get to work as writers for 6 months and break a show and write episodes. It's not unique, but it's very rare. So all credit to him.
And Dennis McGrath was a mentor at the CFC, I think, at one point, right?
So many showrunners have come. He was a student there originally, and then he went on to lead a writer's room there. But to your point about the themes of Allegiance, I was talking about Flashpoint, and I would never attempt to make Flashpoint today. That show explored the human costs of heroism, and there were many great things that those officers did. They were trained in psychological profiling. They were compassionate human beings. They were an aspirational representation of what police could be. And so are the cops in Allegiance. So are Sukhpinder's and Enrico's characters, Vince and Sabrina. But I think there are more important issues in policing that should be placed front and center. Yes, it's a difficult job. Yes, it can be traumatic for police officers. But we also have to look at what the impact of bad policing has been on communities And this show explores that. It explores it within the lens of a fast-paced, fun, emotional drama. But we do look at issues of community policing and what does it mean to defund police. We don't sit around talking about defunding police,
Right.
But we have an episode. I'll tell you that the second episode is about a drug overdose, and so our cops are called out because bad drugs have hit the streets. People are overdosing. People are dying or almost dying. So, you think, okay, let's go after the bad guy. Who's this bad apple that's putting these drugs on the street? Well, the story winds up being a bit more complicated. It's actually, they follow a trail that leads them back to a middle-aged woman who's running a storefront shop that sells heroin. Well, why is she selling heroin? Because her daughter was in an accident and her daughter became addicted to painkillers. And then she stopped getting the painkillers and she turned to street drugs and she died because there wasn't a safe supply. So this mom says, well, I know drugs aren't the solution, but it's better than people dying. So she starts selling drugs and somehow someone's gotten into her supply. The story takes its turns. But really, what does defunding the police mean in this regard? It's like we shouldn't be putting all of our energy into locking up people who are taking drugs, dealing drugs. We should also be dealing with the issues that are upstream of the problem. How do we help people that have addictions? Until we can help solve the problem of addictions, how do we at least give people a supply of drugs that is safe? And those are complicated issues for a rookie cop to navigate. But that's the reality of policing. Everything is gray. There are no easy answers. When you start throwing easy answers and when you start following the letter of the law, it can lead to a lot of tears. As Anar says, and her mantra from the beginning of the show was, what's legal is not always fair. And what is it like to be a police officer that has to navigate that reality on the streets today?
Well, especially on the streets of Surrey, I live in Brampton, Ontario. It's a very diverse community and has unique challenges and traffic. There's so many issues right now. And a lot of it matters of culture and race that are very integral to this community. So it's wonderful to see it portrayed on television as part of a police procedural. And it seems it's time to do that, right, Mark?
I think so. I mean, it's issues of race, but it's also issues of class as well. Yeah. And we tend to segment society. One of the things that's so interesting about Surrey is that, and it has this in common in Brampton, is that there are issues that Canadians face that aren't. There's not two camps. There's not Canadians that have been here for, a long time that are white and newcomers. That's not the reality. Some people think that's the reality. That's not the reality. You have families in Surrey that have Punjabi background that have been here since the late 1800s. So, they face modern issues that are worth exploring. And we see some of these reflected in Sabrina's family. There are generational issues. And we've had some brilliant writers that have helped us explore them and not just confined to that community, but also to First Nations communities, to East Asian communities as well, to, and often, we look past race. I mean, it's, stories are about families, about the disconnects that we feel from each other in this day and age. It's a very rich book.
You're dealing with politics as well. There's a cynicism about politicians and, that's an area you're exploring. And it's right off the bat from the pilot with the father of the young police officer who happens to be a cabinet minister, right?
That's right. Sabrina's father is arrested for treason the day that she graduates from the police academy. Yeah. So allegiance is really, it speaks to themes of loyalty, really. Here she is sworn to protect community in a country that has just arrested her father. what are false charges. So how does she feel about that, and how does she feel about that divided loyalty? What is her loyalty to her family, to her own career, to her community, and to her flag? I'll say that we don't get into the politics of what that means too much. We do get into a serialized story that is teased out throughout the cases of the week that involves Sabrina trying to uncover the truths. We look at what treason and terrorism can mean in this country and in this day and age. Domestic terrorism has many faces, and we'll come to understand, I think what the predominant face of that is in Canada these days.
And I like the character and the actor who play the lawyer in the pilot.
Character and the actor. Let me tell you, Markenson should be on the tip of your lips as, I think, one of the best actors I have ever seen, Canada or anywhere else.
Yeah.
And Brian Markenson is one of those actors that you will recognize from somewhere because he's been in everything. Look up his IMDb page in the morning because it's going to take you till the afternoon to get through it. And he has worked on Broadway. He's worked with Mike Nichols. He's worked with Woody Allen. He's a gorgeous, gifted actor who is now also, in addition to keeping up to his busy acting schedule, he gives back by running an acting studio out in Vancouver. And I'll tell you, almost every top actor that we cast out there has worked with him as a coach and mentor in some ways as well.
Yeah, he just explodes every scene. And, there's a range there. There's great potential for comedy. He does it all. It's pretty cool.
I tell you, I'm going to think of a Brian Markenson vehicle as one of the next things to do. David Frazee directed the pilot for Allegiance, and we worked with him a lot on Flashpoint. He said, "Oh, you guys, you can just give Brian a monologue. He'll be fine. You don't need to do anything." Sure enough, Brian's coming to us and saying, "Well, what are you guys doing? You're writing me all these monologues," because we're like, Brian is so good. You can put him on a phone and walk him down the street.
That's what you do, exactly that. He's doing a corridor, and it's just him doing a monologue down a hallway, and it's fantastic. It's really a great scene. More with Mark after these short messages. The second season of the compelling crime thriller Hidden Assets returns to Super Channel for its exclusive Canadian premiere on Sunday, February 11th at 9 p.m., with each episode also available on Super Channel On Demand. This Irish-Belgian-Canadian co-production is a must-watch for aficionados of crime thrillers. In Season 2 of this Super Channel original, Criminal Asset Bureau's new team lead Claire Wallace finds herself at odds with CTU's Christian de Jong over the Antwerp investigation. And speaking of hidden assets, Quebecer and Brio TV favorite Karine Vaness is among the Canadians on Season 2 of this drama. And remember, Super Channel, an all-Canadian service, is available via most cable providers across the country, as well as streaming live and on demand with Amazon Prime Video channels, Apple TV Plus, and the Roku platform in Canada. And we're back. And this is a show where you're going to have opportunities to have guest stars. Obviously, there's different crimes, different cases every week. Do we see some other interesting actors coming this season of 10 episodes?
Yeah, I mean, we've got so many wonderful actors. I mean, even just within our main cast, having David Cubitt come in to play the
my goodness
head of attachment.
He's tremendous. Cubitt, great actor. Yeah,
he's tremendous. I have to contain myself because I just become a little fanboy around a lot of these actors, and I have to remember that I'm the showrunner. And he's tremendous. He's with us. Venus Sud plays a guest role in the second episode, we really benefited from there being a strike, because a lot of these actors that would have been working on big US shows, had the time to come and play in our sandbox for a little while.
Cuban is a guy that in the quiet moments, he just stands out. Everything gets quiet when he speaks and you lean in. I'm a big fan of his.
Yeah. He's got a wonderful, wonderful voice.
Yeah. And speaking of great actors, our pal Rico, my God, he's just so good in everything. And it's wonderful to see him do this again. What was it when, I don't know if you approached him or whoever did to bring him on board, but tell me how he joined the show and how that process went.
Well, I think that when we read the script and we saw that character, it was hard for us, Stephanie and I, to not quickly go to Enrico. I think he was on the list for everyone else that was involved with the show, and he was at the top of everyone's list. How could he not be?
Right.
And having worked with him for 5 years on Flashpoint, between him and Hugh Dillon, there comes a symbiosis between actor and writer when you write that much and that many pages and that many lines for them. It's not that I know Rico or Hugh exceptionally well as human beings. I do know them to some degree, and we're friends, of course, but I can intuit their performance in a way, and I can feel their range. I can imagine the best of what they can give, and when I do that for Rico, and we write lines, and then I sit there on set, he transcends what you write, because often what I write isn't that great, but he makes it great. And he does it great the first time, and then he gives you 4 different versions of great. And the two of us are kind of, I can be an emotional person, but I keep it inside. He's a very emotional person, but he's not afraid to let it show on his sleeve. So it's a good combination. And like, getting back to me being a fan person, boy, I saw him on NYPD Blue back in probably in the mid 90s, playing the son of Peter Boyle. He was in a 2-part episode where he played a schizophrenic character, and he winds up killing his father. And so you have these scenes with this young actor I didn't know, and Danny Boyle and Dennis Franz, and all I could remember thinking after watching those scenes was like, man, who's that guy? Who's that guy? And that was, I think, one of his first breaks on television. And
he was another kid from Etobicoke.
He was. We're all kids from Etobicoke.
I know, right?
Well, but you guys, I know you went to Michael Power.
Right. Yeah. And by the way, Mark, I was in the regifted program.
Yeah, well, you guys were tough, you Catholic schoolboys. Rico went to one of those places.
Henry Carr. He went to Henry Carr. Yeah,
Henry Carr.
Right. No, I'm a huge fan. Absolutely. He's a wonderful person. And you're right. He's boy, you can I'm very fortunate to have talked to him on a few of these occasions. It's always great. Now, we're going to remind folks that Allegiance starts on February the 7th. That's a Wednesday night, right?
That's right.
And you were working on Transplant as well. And I just wondered, Transplant, a very well made TV show. I was surprised that it is wrapped up after 4 seasons. Were you surprised, or did you see it ending that quickly, or
I'm surprised, because I think it's a beautiful show that really resonated with viewers, and Joseph Kay and Rachel Langer are really the heart and soul of that show. And I think, I don't know the circumstances, because Steph and I were in there just for a little guest spot helping in development on the 2nd season. But those two, along with a great team of writers, really, they carried that show on their shoulders. And, speaking from experience, there's only so long you can do that. They did a lot of writing, So it may be that they ran out of. We ended Flashpoint after 5 seasons because sometimes you want to leave your baby in a place where it still feels good, and move on to the next thing. So I kind of hope that's the reason. I don't see another reason. It was a very successful show.
Yeah, it was. And great acting there. And they dealt with a lot of profound issues as well on that show, beyond just it being a hospital show. Now, a lot of talk about changes to the Canadian, maybe the Broadcast Act and the CBC itself. You've had some time now to have watched television change. It never stops changing. I mean, it's breathtaking, really, in over 20 years, how TV has evolved. Are there changes you'd like to see in Canada in terms of making television shows and getting them on the air, on broadcast or streaming? Are things moving in the right direction, do you think, Mark?
Well, it's hard to say. I hope so. I think this is a defining moment in what happens to Canadian television. The only reason, to be honest, that we have Canadian television is because the private broadcasters have had to contribute into the Canadian television system. You know how it works in that, and we won't get into the weeds of it all, but our private broadcasters have made a good living from broadcasting US shows largely.
Yeah.
And the government has said you got to take a little bit of that profit and put it into telling Canadian stories. And so they have, and that's why we have had successful shows like Flashpoint. Those days are changing. The private broadcasting model is shifting. People's viewing habits are turning away now to Netflix and Amazon and Disney. And so if we want to continue to make Canadian television, sadly, I think we still need to have a certain degree of regulation to ensure that Canadian stories are still told. And on one level, I hate that because it feels like we're saying that this is medicine that has to be force-fed to people by saying you have to make Canadian TV. But the thing is that I think it's really important that as a country, we have stories that reflect who we are. And somebody may say to me, well, Flashpoint was on CBS. It was about a bunch of SWAT cops. Tell me how that's different. Well, I'll tell you how it was different. It was about a bunch of SWAT cops who fired their guns 5 times over 80 episodes.
Wow.
You tell me that would have happened on any U.S. version of a SWAT show. We've seen that show. We've seen that SWAT show in the U.S.
Yeah.
And that show came out in 2008, right when Obama was coming into power. Mm-hmm. And right when people in America were getting fatigued with George Bush going into Iraq, guns firing and asking questions later. That story resonated with American viewers, I think, because they were a little tired of that. They were like, well, why do we have to do it that way? Why don't we ask questions first? And so it was a distinctive Canadian viewpoint. We saw it ourselves as a nation of peacekeepers to some degree. We still do. I don't know if it's true or not. The slogan of that team was "Keep the Peace," and it resonated with people. And I honestly don't think that story would be told unless we had to make Canadian stories.
It's a great point. Does Allegiance have a slogan yet?
I don't think it does. There's something that Cubit has said a couple of times, which is what I like, which is go do good work.
Yeah.
And I think when you're looking at policing, it's like, well, we're never going to keep the peace. What is it? And Anar had a quote from in a speech of Sabrina's in the first episode at her valedictory address, where she says, go and do a little bit of good where you can. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a sentiment that resonates with us as Canadians and maybe one that could be picked up by cops today.
Was peace, order, and good government? What's our motto is along those lines, right? That point where Cubity's talking to the, it's like the morning briefing. It reminded me of Hill Street, of course, and let's be careful out there. But as soon as I heard that line, it really resonated in that same way. I think you do have a hook there to hang a lot of stories on. Anyway, you've been great, generous with your time, Mark. I just have a couple of final questions. One is, are you sad that the Westwood Theater has been torn down and we can't use that scene that you and I talked about, like a shootout between the W and the E on the top of the Westwood Theater?
Oh, it was my dream to shoot at the Westwood Theater before it got torn down. That great old cinema that you and I both know from Etobicoke days. So many films I saw there.
Yeah.
Alas.
Oh well, that's life. Now, what are you watching now? Are you streaming? Are you watching? Do you have a favorite show that you really, you and Stephanie are enjoying?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've not been watching a ton lately because when you're making TV, you tend to fall behind on watching your TV. But I'll tell you, Reservation Dogs was a half-hour show, so that's one that we snuck in most nights towards the end of our time shooting in Vancouver. I just, I loved it so much. This beautiful little story about 4 teens that are healing from the death of a friend, who are looking outside of this small town that they live in and thinking that there's something better elsewhere, when maybe there's something quite wonderful there for them at home too. I love that show, and there's so many great First Nations Canadian actors in there, and
a show that wasn't afraid to be really funny, right? I mean, that was the great gift of that series, I think.
Funny and weird. You never knew what you were going to get episode to episode, but that's psycho with TV for you as well, right?
Yeah.
10-15 is another show that I loved watching, and I maybe there's a theme here because that's a story about a friendship between 2 girls, and the 2 creators of that show, these 2 wonderful, talented women, played themselves as 13-year-olds as well. These women in their 30s playing themselves as 13-year-olds and acting with other 13-year-olds, and it's such a brave, funny, raw show that has a shape to it over 3 seasons, and when it ends, it just ripped my heart out because I can't tell you what the ending is, but there are 2 shows that are so completely different from what Steph and I work on that they were top of our lists and salvations at the end of long days.
That's great. When you were a youngster, when you were growing up in Etobicoke, was there a show that you would race home from school or just loved watching when you were a kid?
Well, in those days, you'd race home from school to watch all the reruns, right? So that would be your WKRPs and your Three's Company and Welcome Back, Kotter and all those shows.
Yeah.
But you said Hill Street Blues, and Hill Street Blues was probably the first grown-up show that I watched with my parents, and I loved it. Loved the theme tune for it. Loved the different worlds that it took you inside. It was a lovely, character-driven, at times emotional police show.
And what a cast! And I've talked to some of those guys over the years, Charles Hayde and different people, and they describe themselves as sort of mongrels and with potato faces, except for Veronica Hamill, like the rest of them just look like regular folks. That was kind of a turning point for reality in cop shows, right?
And it was a line from there to NYPD Blue. And I lost my wallet in New York City a couple of years ago. And I went to report it. And I got to go into some precinct. And I was like, oh my God, I'm on the set of one of these shows. I took my report and I was like, do you mind if I just kind of sit here a while longer? Because I felt like I was in my favorite place. That was a beautiful show. I loved that show so much. But I also... I lived in England for 5 years because my dad is English. So when I came back, as I said, I watched the Beachcombers, and, Mr. Dress Up was probably the first show that I watched as a kid. And I remember going to see Ernie Coombs do his show live. So that is stamped into my brain and heart.
That's as Canadian as you can get. Good for you.
MASH, of course, MASH is a show that gets talked about in our writers' rooms. And, why is a half-hour show that's ostensibly a comedy getting talked about in a procedural police room? And it's just because it was, how do you blend that thing you have to say with comedy and heart? Where do you find tears, and joy living alongside levity? It was a beautiful show. I haven't seen the 2-hour special yet. I am a listener to MASH Matters, which is a great podcast by a fan of the show, and I'm blanking on his name, but he played Igor in the series. But it's a wonderful tribute that sort of goes behind the scenes there.
Oh, really? Wow. No, I have to check that out. I did see the 2-hour special. I recommend it. It's very chronological, but it really covers from the actors' points of view and how that cast kept evolving. It's a good watch for sure. Finally, and I'm guessing you've named a few shows. You're going to pick from one your favorite all-time TV theme song.
Yeah, well, of course, Hill Street Blues and MASH, like it's two greater theme songs there could be. And then we had a piano in the same room as our television set, and my parents gave me a easy to play greatest hits of the 70s and the 80s piano book, and it had all these shows that I can't remember now, but it had the theme for Hill Street Blues and MASH in there, so I would play them on the piano. And for the MASH theme, they had the lyrics printed in there as well. And it really struck me how, I don't know if that song was composed for the TV show. I don't think it was.
For the movie, wasn't it?
I don't know. Well, there's a lyric in there that stayed with me because it spoke to what that show was about. And I went to look it up again recently. And I listened to your podcast, so I know you asked this question. So I had to look at what that lyric was that stayed with me, and I found it. And what it was I try to find a way to make all our little joys relate without that ever-present hate. And that's what that show was about these two doctors finding solace, company, joy, and laughter in each other through this hate-filled, horrible war. Wow. So you can't top those two classics. I mean, I will say the Succession theme as well is
pretty good.
Not only, because not just the opening theme, but the way it's woven back into every episode endlessly in different ways. That fusion of classical pieces, electronic pieces. It's chaotic, and yet at other times spare. I've read that it's influenced by Beethoven and its Pathétique Sonata, and I find that fits so well with what that show is, because that show is Shakespeare. It's Shakespearean. It's grand.
Yes,
and Beethoven's Pathétique Sonata is grand. So it's just such a great example of how music and tone of a show can work so well together.
Well, my hat's off to you. I think I tried to learn the Hill Street theme on piano. Too many sharps and flats for me, Mark. It was too much, but I think that's great. I think it would be wonderful to be able to play that. It's a beautiful piano piece and so contrary to what you're expecting from a cop show. Bochco was wise to ask the composer to go the other direction there and make it just this gentle theme. It really works. Listen, Mark, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Congratulations on Allegiance. It's airing premieres on Wednesday, February 7th on CBC, and I'm sure you can stream it on CBC Gem. Do you also have this show appearing on a U.S. network that's run by a Canadian lad who seems to be buying every single Canadian show? Or
we've just finished the first and second episode, so I think it's going out to market.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed, but you've had great success crossing the border in the past. So, Mark Ellis, thank you very, very much for this. It's a pleasure to talk to you always, and great catching up. Hope to see you in person someday soon.
Yeah, you too. Thanks so much, Bill.
Take care. Thanks to our superior showrunner here at Brio TV, Phil Hong. Give it up for BJ Del Conte, Paul Boudra, and all the crispy critters, as well as piano man Stephen Dudley, who many years ago recorded the music you hear on this podcast. Finally, thanks to you, listener. If you enjoyed this conversation, let us know with a like or a comment, even a review at Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Bill Brio. Thanks for listening.